When you spend 9 long years in opposition, it can be extremely difficult to kick the habit of blaming the other mob. You know, like taking swipes at a government and playing nasty personal politics becomes almost a daily routine. And routines, as we know, are tough to break. That must be a big part of the reason why federal Labor has continued to toss grenades at the former government every day since they won the election. 2 weeks on. Treasury's inaccurate economic forecasts, the international power crisis, regional gas prices, you name it, it's the Morrison government's fault. It's been incessant.
This is a government which the former government promised a gas-fired recovery and left us a gas bin fire for the new government to deal with.
The big problem is some of the legacy issues the last 9 years of coalition have left us, from aged care to NDIS waste.
These national accounts are a glimpse of the mess that the former government left behind for us to clean up.
A disgraceful act from a government which was prepared to politicise everything but solve nothing.
These are the people that wanted to continue JobKeeper for all of Australia. These are the people that wanted to pay for your rats. These are the people that wanted to give you bonuses if you got a vaccination. Come on. If only the reasons for all of those dramas were that simple. They are not. We were told during the election campaign Labor had the clear plans. Clear plan for productivity, a clear plan for wage rises, a clear plan to arrest the cost of living, a clear plan to make power prices cheaper, and even a clear plan to arrest the debt. Well, what happened? Get on with it. Maybe there's a huge difference between delivering great-sounding election promises and the reality of being in the hot seats. Australia, with the rest of the world, mind you, have some enormous challenges. The solutions aren't so easily found. That's just the truth. This blame game pattern reached a rowdy pinnacle today when the Deputy Prime Minister, Richard Marles, came head-to-head with newly anointed opposition leader Peter Dutton.
You know, what we've got now is really the product of 9 years of failure on the part of the former government in terms of having consistent energy policy, and it's why we don't have renewables online in the way that we should. Investment in renewables has been down. It's why we don't have a grid which can accept them, and that's what we're going to do. But given the failure of the last 9 years, that's now why we have an energy crisis in the country right now.
So that's a complete rewrite of history and a concoction, of course. I think the public's going to get sick of this line coming out of coming out of the government that, you know, the last government's to blame for everything. The investment as a government that we placed into renewables was at an all-time high, one of the highest levels of investment in renewables in our country compared to any other country around the world. So this has nothing to do with renewables, and I think the government has to take responsibility for what's a serious issue.
Under any measurement, Peter Dutton is spot on. You just have to take since 2019, the former government committed more than $16.5 billion to new emissions reduction measures. Some would argue that kind of spending turned off its base. You see, balancing the public's apparent demand for a new renewable nirvana and keeping the lights on while making that all affordable is just a very tough job. No one pushing for an early green power transition has come up with a scientific document clearly explaining how this is done while preventing power outages, keeping the lights on, and until they do that, until they can justify closing down power stations, it's all just unsustainable. Virtue signalling. Plus, as the sensible players know in this debate, Australia won't change its weather or the weather of the world, no matter how much CO2 we stop emitting. That's the fact the kids aren't told in the classroom. Coal is the baseload star of our grid. Our exports too allow us to pay for all that we have in this country. It drives the nation's wealth. Now, as for gas, any tapering of gas exports to reduce power prices, they call this the trigger. You can't do that. Even if you made the announcement tomorrow, nothing changes until the beginning of 2023 because exporters are locked into contracts you've got to abide with. And look what South Australia has done. No coal-fired power generation since 2016. That's when they went renewable mad. And this week, what's happened? South Australia is getting nearly a fifth of its power from filthy diesel generators. Isn't that green revolution working well for them? You see, that's what happens when you rush towards this great green transition. The UK, Europe, the US, they're all realising this reality this year. And it didn't take long before the Climate Change and Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, turned to coal to save the day. Listen.
The role of government in ensuring what are often private sector, in some cases state-owned coal-fired power are operating is perhaps limited. But again, as I stress, if there is advice to me about sensible and measured actions that can be taken, I would take them.
Coal's no longer off the table. And as the Institute of Public Affairs stated today, big business, Labor and union super funds have been mugged by reality and are finally waking up to what real Australians have always known. Net zero is wreaking havoc on Australia's energy system. And if Labor was serious about controlling the havoc, they'd stop this tiresome blame game against the former government. The election is over. Tell them that, will you? Accept the realities and reconsider new gas, coal and oil projects. Unless you transition more slowly to this green renewable promised land and stop being coalophobes, Australians will just pay more for their energy. Watch that happen in 2022, 2023. And what else happens? We pay more for every single thing we buy.